Good morning, friends, and welcome to another week. It is Monday. It's Monday, June 6th. Not only another week, but another month. It's been a whole month since I've spoken to you through this format, through PB Reads the Bible. And that's what this is. This is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. What's that mean? Well, it means somebody named PB reads the Bible. Who's PB? Me. I am Pastor Brian, pastor here at the Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro. And thank you for joining with me. It's great to be together in this way. Great to be together in this way. And this is PB Reads the Bible, and this is episode 13 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. We took a little time off. So much going on last week. But we're back at it. We will be doing this week, and then we're going to have 2 weeks break as I take some vacation time. But we've got today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we're going to get through probably 4 chapters of 1 Samuel. That's the plan anyway at this time, 4 chapters. We're getting through 1 today for sure. Tomorrow's and Wednesdays, I'm going to be pre-recording, but they will go live for you at 9 o'clock. I have 2 Zoom meetings early in the morning, tomorrow 7:30 and Wednesday at 9 o'clock. Can't be on 2 Zoom things at once. So I will pre-record and have them launch live at 9 o'clock, both tomorrow and Thursday. So when you see me wearing this shirt tomorrow, I'm not wearing the same shirt 2 days in a row. It's just I'm recording tomorrow's today. But it is great to have you with me. It's great to be together with you in this way because we are together, we are connected, just in a different way. It's 21st century format. So go ahead and let me know you're there because I only see numbers. Facebook tells me a number of people who are watching, and it's always nice to know who they actually are. So say hello, say good morning, all those things. Also, any specific prayer requests or concerns, things you want to lift up or whatever, whether it's a joy or a concern, I want to know about it. We can keep each other surrounded in prayer. This is a small group, and one of the duties of a small group is to share life, and that means knowing what's going on. So here's a concern, here's a prayer for you folks. Some of you might have seen the email, but I would ask for prayers for Peggy Sandell and for her family. Peggy will be turning 100 on Thursday, or should be turning 100 on Thursday. However, she fell yesterday, and she has a hematoma on the brain. And they said performing the surgery on a 29-year-old would be tricky, and on a 90-year-old, virtually impossible. And in keeping with her wishes, as she has stated numerous times and put in writing, she does not want extensive, or whatever the word might be, means of keeping her alive. So they are not doing the surgery. She also has a DNR, do not resuscitate order. So, well, of course, none of us ever knows, right? But it could be just a matter of hours, or it could be a few days. We don't know. The family just wants her to be at peace. The family does ask for prayers for comfort for her. I know their strong desire is that she not linger, but that she go to be with God sooner rather than later would be their desire at this point. They just don't want to see anything. So anyway, palliative care is being administered to Sister Peggy. So keep her and her family in your prayers, please. Thank you. And so our question for this week, am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? Ooh. Am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? It is healthy to be self-aware. However, being too aware of self can make us self-absorbed if we're not careful. And so Wesley wanted us to reflect on the question, Am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? So that we confront our human penchant to be so concerned with self that we lose sight of the others. And suggested scripture to go along with this is Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. Philippians 2, 3, and 4. So let's see some good mornings. Good morning, Cheryl. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Marilyn. Good to have you. Good to have the three of you joining with me today. Wonderful. We're seeing interesting things. Anyway, so let's jump into it, shall we? We're going to look at chapter 14 of 1 Samuel. And this chapter is an interesting chapter. It's a really great chapter. In fact, many Bible scholars refer to it as the greatest example of prose literature in the Hebrew Bible. It's that well liked. It's that well done. The author / editors did a wonderful job of putting this together. It's intricately woven. It's mostly dialogue, and it's a couple different scenes. It's got plots. It's got subplots. It's got major character development, and it's great. I'm going to point out a couple things before we even start, or things for you to watch out for you to look for, because it strongly contrasts Saul and Jonathan. It speaks some very, it points out that very strongly, it points out the contrasts and the differences between Saul and Jonathan. And we'll talk about those, what I mean by that, when we get to the end. But first we'll start jumping in and reading. Okay. And I don't know, I'll probably stop as we go along, but we'll see. Maybe I'll read them. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree that is at Migron. The troops that were with him were about 600 men, along with Ahijah, son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of Yahweh in Shiloh, carrying an ephod. Now the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. In the pass by which Jonathan tried to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other. The name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Senah. One crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Pause. So here we got Geba and Gibeah again, right? This different words, maybe the same place, maybe a general area rather than one town. And that Michmash, so but it wasn't as great. It's really setting up the drama right off the bat, and we're already seeing the contrast between Jonathan and Saul. Jonathan is being demonstrated as, one might say, a go-getter. He's an active person. He's an active person. He wants to go. He wants to do something, and he takes along his armor bearer. This is more than just a little kid or something who only there to carry his armor. The armor bearer traditionally is a very seasoned warrior. He's a good warrior, and he's in charge of going. He's supposed to stay with Jonathan, and we're going to see what happens there. Meanwhile, Saul is being shown as waiting for something to happen rather than being the one making something happen. He's sitting there under a pomegranate tree, so we can picture somebody relaxing almost, right? But what's important is who is with him, not necessarily all under the tree, but in that same area. He's got his 600 warriors, it says, right? Not a huge army by any stretch of the imagination. Got like 600 warriors, and he has this priest who is with him. And we recognize a couple of these names, perhaps, right? Ichabod, Phinehas, Eli. Ah, okay. So we know where this is, where this is going. So he is a descendant of Eli, and he's serving as priest, and he has with him an ephod, carrying an ephod. And what's an ephod? And this isn't necessarily the ephod, the prime, the ephod itself, but it's an ephod. And it was a particular type of article of clothing goes over the top, and usually is usually connected to, and we're going to hear about the um, Thummim and Nahumim. I can't remember their names. I always pronounce them wrong too. But two stones of some form that were used for casting lots. They were named. One was named one thing, and the other was named something else. And we could say almost like yes and no, or thrown out and called back, something like that. And you use it for casting lots to identify to come to a decision. It's supposed to be, they're used for oracles to help communicate with God, would be the premise here. But it's important that we see that this priest in this article, the ephod, presumably carrying those two items, are with Saul. All right. But Jonathan is he's trying to go down this rocky crag, across a little valley, and then up the other crag, right? Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that Yahweh will act for us, for nothing can hinder Yahweh from saving by many or by few." Pause. So Jonathan wants to do something, but he is trusting that God will assist him, and he's going to set up a little test, because he doesn't want to try to do something without God, but he seems to have a nice strong faith. He is indicating that nobody and nothing can prevent God from doing what God wants to do, is basically what he says. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving. But also we could read into this a little bit and say that no one can make the Lord save without God wanting to save. So he is keeping in mind God's freedom and God's power. Lessons that were learned earlier in this book, discussed earlier in this book, and lessons that it doesn't seem, doesn't appear that Saul learned these lessons, but Jonathan has. His armor bearer said to him, "Do all that your mind inclines to. I am with you. As your mind is, so is mine." Then Jonathan said, "Now we will cross over to those men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for Yahweh has given them into our hand. That will be the sign for us." So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, "Look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." Pause. They're using Hebrews as an epithet. It's a derogatory term, and saying that they were cowards hiding in the hills and in the holes. The men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer, saying, "Come up to us, and we will show you something." Pause. Doesn't specifically say, but we could kind of read into that, come up to us so that we can battle, and we'll show you a thing or two about war and about fighting, thinking that they have nothing to fear from these two Hebrews. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up after me, for Yahweh has given them into the hand of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, with his armor bearer following after him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer coming after him killed them. In that first slaughter, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed about 20 men within an area about half a furrow long in an acre of land. Pause. Yours might say a yoke length. It's weird. Anyway, there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. Pause. So, Jonathan, what's happening here? Well, a lot of this has the language of a holy war. That this idea that Jonathan has that no one can stop God's from saving people, and kind of putting God to the test. If this happens, then we know that God has put them in our hands. That God has put them in our hands. So Jonathan is using the language of a holy war. Jonathan is giving credit to God, and he's willing to follow and to do the things that he believes he needs to do because of this holy war. We also see it as the holy war language, because the camp of the Philistines and all the people and the field and all that, they're all thrown into a panic, and there's even an earthquake. This is language and events that take place in holy war stories in Scripture. Okay, so all of this is taking place now. Change of the scene. We're going now from Jonathan and his armor bearer and his battle against some Philistines, and we're going to cut away to Saul and see what's he doing and what's he going to do. Saul's lookouts in Gibeah of Benjamin were watching as the multitude was surging back and forth. Then Saul said to the troops that were with him, "Call the roll and see who has gone from us." When they had called the roll, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Pause. We would have expected that Saul would have just immediately gathered his army and rushed out to join this battle. He doesn't. He first calls a roll to see who's missing. And then he finds out that it's Jonathan and his armor bearer, only the two. Now we figure he's got to head out and join this battle. It's his son. Does he? Does he rush right out? Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God here." Pause. And yours might have a footnote next to ark saying ephod, because it's probably ephod. It makes a whole lot more sense than ark, because we've already been told that this guy has an ephod. And because of some of the language coming up, we figure it's got to be the ephod rather than the ark. Plus, remember what happened the last time they had the ark in battle. It was captured. So they don't want that. So it's probably the ephod that they have there. But the point is that rather than joining into the army, Saul is going to consult. He's seems to be more cautious, almost overly cautious, and he seems to be very concerned with piety and with following these kind of rules. That's not necessarily bad, but we're seeing this drastic contrast between the two. And the part that's bad is what is Saul's point of following these kind of rules? Of why is he being so pious? Is he being pious out of love and concern and care for God, or is he being pious for some other reasons? I think we're going to find out. So bring the ephod of God here, for at that time the ephod of God went with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. And Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Pause. So withdraw your hand, what does that mean? It sounds like the priest was reaching in to pull out the Urim and Thummim so that he could cast the lots to be the oracle, to do those things. But finally, instead, Saul's going to act. Finally, he says, "Just pull your hand up." Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle, and every sword was against the other, so that there was very great confusion. More holy war language there. Finally, he's acting. He's joined the battle. Now, the Hebrews, who had previously who previously had been with the Philistines and had gone up with them into the camp, turned and joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Pause. What's that mean? Remember from a week ago? Well, I know it's more than a week ago, a week and a half ago, when we had a conversation about that. They were some Hebrews, lower class, we might say, people from the Israelites, became mercenaries and were working with the Philistines, and they're now turning away from the Philistines to help the Israelites. Likewise, when all the Israelites who had gone into hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed closely after them in the battle. So Yahweh gave Israel the victory that day. The battle passed beyond Beth Aven, and the troops with Saul numbered altogether about 10,000 men. The battle spread out over the hill country of Ephraim. All right. Yeah, right. Great. Oh, pause, by the way. Great. Battle's going wonderfully for Israel, and they have the Philistines on the run. So you would think Saul would want to just keep after them, right? And yes, he does. But listen. Now, Saul committed a very rash act on that day. He had laid an oath on the troops, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before it is evening, and I have been avenged on my enemies." They call it a very rash act, right? A very rash act. In that, which follows the Latin translation, the Greek translation of the Hebrew. I don't know what the Hebrew technically means, but the Greek translation of the Hebrew refers to it as a blunder, not just a rash act, but a blunder, that it was a mistake in doing this. He had laid an oath on the troops, saying, "Cursed be anyone who has any food." Continuing, so none of the troops tasted food. All the troops came upon a honeycomb, and there was honey on the ground. When the troops came upon the honeycomb, the honey was dripping out, but they did not put their hands to their mouths, for they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father, charge the troops with the oath. So he extended the staff that was in his hand and dipped the tip of it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Pause. In other words, he felt some nourishment from it. The sugar started pumping and getting him going. He was, as sugar does, as honey does, as food does. It brightens him up. It gets him going. Then one of the soldiers said, "Your father strictly charged the troops with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food this day.' And so the troops are faint." Then Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of the honey. How much better if today the troops had eaten freely of the spoil taken from their enemies, for now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great." Pause. Wow. So we'd say virtually an open condemnation of Saul by his son Jonathan, saying, "Oh man, my dad was so stupid with this rule today. He really was. What a mistake he has made. And look what's happening. We're not going to have as great a victory as we could have and should have had, because the Lord has been on our side, because he wouldn't let the troops eat." He said, "Just look at my eyes, how this little bit of honey invigorated me. Imagine if all of you had the same thing happen to them." Right? After they had struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, the troops were very faint. So the troops flew upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the troops ate them with the blood. Pause. So Saul was all concerned about piety and making this oath and stuff like that. And look what it's led to. It has led to the troops, a large number of the troops, eating meat in a fashion that the law dictated they shouldn't have had. God had specifically said in the laws, You can eat meat, but you cannot have any blood in it. It has to be thoroughly drained of blood in order for it to be acceptable for you to eat it. But they're so hungry, so famished, they're just eating whatever they can with the blood still in it. We would say raw meat. So, which that's probably the reason for that rule by God in the first place. God didn't want people getting sick from eating it raw, and so this is a major sacral violation. Continuing, then it was reported to Saul, "Look, the troops are sinning against Yahweh by eating with the blood." And he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone before me here." Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the troops and say to them, let all bring their oxen or their sheep and slaughter them here and eat. And do not sin against Yahweh by eating with the blood." So all of the troops brought their oxen with them that night and slaughtered them there. And Saul built an altar to Yahweh. It was the first altar that he built to Yahweh. Pause. So we assume that he built other altars as well, but we're not really told that. So Saul figures, okay, yeah, this is a major violation, but we'll make it right by doing this pious act, by setting up the altar, by slaughtering the animals in a prescribed fashion, draining all the blood out of it, and hopefully that will appease God from this terrible sin that the troops have done. Continuing. Then Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and despoil them until the morning light. Let us not leave one of them." They said, "Do whatever seems good to you." But the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. Pause. So again, keeping with his tradition of these pious acts, he wants to check with God to make sure that God is gonna fight with him, rather than just rush off and start a battle on his own. But he doesn't get the answer right away. Now, rather than saying, "Well, let's give it a shot," and going out and act, because remember, he was already criticized for going to sacrifices that he shouldn't have been doing. Rather than, maybe he would have been better off just starting that battle without Samuel. Maybe he would have been better off here starting the battle, but instead he decides to do more things, do more pious acts, and declare another rash oath, another blunder on his part. Continuing. Saul said, "Come here, all you leaders of the people, and let us find out how this sin has arisen today. For as Yahweh lives, who saves Israel, even if it is in my son Jonathan, he shall surely die." But there was no one among all the people who answered him. He said to all Israel, "You shall be on," pause, presumably because many of them know what happened and they don't want Jonathan to die. They're thinking this is all wrong. He said to all Israel, "You shall be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will be on the other side." The people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." Then Saul said, "O Yahweh, God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant today? If this guilt is on me or in my son Jonathan, O Yahweh, God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim." And Jonathan and Saul were indicated by the lot, but the people were cleared. Pause. Let's finish it up. Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was taken. Pause. All right. So it's going exactly the way Saul said. Even if it is my son, Jonathan, he shall die. The people didn't respond when Saul first said it. When I said, let's pause here, and then I changed my mind, between verse 40, the end of 41 and beginning of 42, in some old texts and in some other stories, the people try to stop Saul before he ends up finding out that it's Jonathan. They try to tell him, "Okay, you've gone far enough. but it doesn't work, and Saul needs to, Saul finishes up this pious act, and it comes down on Jonathan. So what happens? What's Jonathan going to do? What's Jonathan going to say? Is Saul going to continue with this? Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die." Saul said, "God do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan." Then the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die? Who has accomplished this great victory in Israel? Far from it. As Yahweh lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God today." Pause. So the people are giving Jonathan credit, but really they're giving God the credit and saying that Jonathan worked with God today. So we don't want him to die. So the people ransomed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul withdrew from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Pause. Would seem he gave up then, and missed out on an opportunity to completely, perhaps anyway, completely vanquish the Philistines. So now we get into no longer dialogue. This is just more of a narrative filling in some details. When Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He did valiantly and struck down the Amalekites and rescued Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchizua. And the names of his two daughters were these. The name of the firstborn was Merab, and the name of the younger Michal. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. And the name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. There was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any strong or valiant warrior, he took him into his service. End of chapter 14. So we find out a little bit more about Saul as far as what kind of battles the Israelites participated in under him. Some scholars say this is an insertion, and this actually lists some of David's enemies, but it's presumable. We hear about him fighting a couple of these people. It's easily to presume that he did fight against these other enemies of Israel as well. We also hear some names about his kids and his wife, and Abner, son of Ner, who is going to be the commander of his army. The Hebrew is tricky, so we're not 100% sure of the relationship between Saul and Abner. One way, you can read it one way, and it sounds like Abner is his uncle. You can read it another way, and it sounds as Abner is the son of his uncle, so his cousin. In other words, it depends exactly where you put punctuation, and just depends on how you read it. So there's disagreement. Cousin, uncle, whatever. He was a relative, and he's the commander of his army. All right. So that's it for today, my friends. The end of chapter 14 and end of episode 13. We will see you again tomorrow morning. I won't be here live, but it will be live for you at 9 o'clock. I will have to pre-record for tomorrow and for Wednesday. So for tomorrow, when you see me wearing this shirt, I'm not wearing the same shirt 2 days in a row. I am merely pre-recorded the session. So, friends, thank you for joining me. I do pray that this has been beneficial, that you've learned something or relearned something in this lesson, that God has spoken to you in some way. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to everything that God, our living, loving, active God, is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, Papa," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.